Hey, everybody, welcome back to another week of the Fixate Binge Podcast. I'm your host, Joe. I'm so glad you're with us. I'm always glad when you guys set aside a little bit of your time in your day, in your week, or wherever you're currently at, whether you're stuck in wall-to-wall traffic or sitting at the DMV, or just need a break. You just need a break and you put this in, you want to listen to it. Thank you for being here. I appreciate the time that you give for me to spend some time with you. This episode, if you didn't really pay attention to the title of the episode, this episode is going to deal primarily with Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. I am assuming, if you're listening to this, that you've already seen the film. That's the assumption I'm making. Nevertheless, if you have not seen the film, I can't promise that I won't offer tons of spoilers just off the top of my head, just riffing, as it were. So if you haven't seen the film, please press pause, come back to it. And after you've seen the film, please do dive in, because I'd love to hear what your perspectives are. I'd love to hear if you have a different take, if you felt differently about it than I do. I have to be completely honest here. I need to come clean. This is not a final verdict. This podcast is not going to give a final verdict on the Odyssey. And the simple fact is I'm still processing it. I think what we were given is a veritable feast. There is so much on offer here that I think this is going to require more than one or two viewings at best. In some ways I feel that artistically, we're really, when it comes to Nolan, we're drinking from the fire hose here. We're not gonna absorb everything that he's throwing at us, and I think that's the result of the genius of Christopher Nolan and the fact that he is so meticulous, and he has a specific approach, a very specific and disciplined style, and that can be off-putting to some people. But when it comes to Nolan, I think he's making the kinds of films that will be endlessly poring over, thinking about, ruminating about, stewing about, arguing about, assessing. We'll be doing this with Nolan, I think, for the rest of his career. Long after Nolan has left the earth, long after I've left the earth, I still think that cinemaphiles will come back to the cinematic corpus of Christopher Nolan, and they'll be able, like they do with David Lynch today, they will pick apart certain aspects, running themes, messages, tropes, whatever it is. I think the conversation about the mark that Christopher Nolan has made on cinema is going to carry on decades and decades and decades after he's long since gone. And I feel that that is certainly the case with his latest film in the cinema now, The Odyssey, starring Matt Damon, Tom Holland, John Bernthal, Lupita Nyong'o, John Leguizamo, Samantha Morton. I'm going to forget so many names here. Charlize Theron. Who else? Benny Safdie. So many names. This is a real, and of course, Anne Hathaway. There is so much going on in the film that I think before I jump into it, I do need to come clean about something else. So just so you know, I mentioned this on last week's episode, in anticipation of seeing the film. Seeing the film on IMAX. There are only 41 IMAX screens on planet Earth that are formatted to show 70 millimeter prints of the film. So, for instance, if you live in, North or South Dakota, Iowa, Nebraska, Utah, Wyoming, Montana, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, I think, you're out of luck. You're out of luck if you want to see the 70 millimeter print of Nolan's The Odyssey. There are only 41 around the world that can show it in IMAX 70 millimeter format, and of those 41, only 25 in the United States. Just to put that in perspective, there's only one 70 millimeter IMAX screen in the entire continent of Australia. There's only one in the entire country of England, and it's the British Film Institute's BFI IMAX screen in London. So on and so forth. There are just so many other countries that are bereft and don't have any ability to show this in 70 millimeter. So I felt very fortunate. I felt very lucky. I felt like I had the golden ticket in many ways. I had a very Charlie Bucket moment when I found a Friday morning, 10:50 a.m. screening at the Dublin, California Regal Cinemas IMAX. There are 2 seats, albeit they are in the second row, but they're somewhat middle of the second row. When it comes to IMAX, the further back you sit, I think the better the experience is, but I'll take what I can get, right? It's still 70 millimeter, and these things are selling out fast. So got my tickets for my wife and I. We both had to take the day off of work because it was on a weekday. We drove down to the Regal Cinemas in Dublin, California. We got there, we got in, we got our seats, we sat down. The film started, and for the next 2.5, almost 3 hours, I mean, the film just whizzed by. It doesn't even feel like 3 hours. I think what happened was I didn't get an opportunity to fully absorb the meaning and the themes of the film because I was too focused, I think, on the technical aspects of the 70 millimeter IMAX presentation. I think that's what I was spending most of my cognitive powers were kind of bent towards paying attention to that. And I think, in fact, I don't think, I know I need to see this film again. Not because I have nothing else better to do, but because I think I have not properly experienced the film. That is to say, I was too busy paying attention to the technical aspects of the presentation itself, and I didn't spend enough time appreciating and admiring some of the nuance of the characters. This is not a very dialogue-heavy script. I mean, yes, there's a script. Yes, it has dialogue, of course, but there are not, long scenes of exposition with dialogue. There's not. There's not. And so what we're working with is what we have. And so I need to spend more time with this. I will say this. I saw this on a Friday. I'm recording this on a Sunday evening. I have not stopped thinking about the film. That's the mark of an impressionable film, when it doesn't leave your consciousness. And the reason why I have not stopped thinking about it is because I feel that I have not properly experienced all its meaning, that this is going to be an evolving opinion. So yes, I haven't written my review on Letterboxd yet. I'm still, the ideas are germinating. There's still a lot of things coming on, because this film, of course, Homer's The Odyssey is filled with allegory. I mean, we're not literally talking about Odysseus experiencing, giants and monsters and sea hags and things like that. Of course, that's what happens in the poem that this comes from. But with everything else, it's a metaphor for something larger. And there's larger meaning behind this. And there are some departures that Nolan takes in the story of Odysseus than follow the arc, as it were, the character arc in the Odyssey. There are, some extrapolations from the Iliad, which is the other poem that Homer wrote, the Odyssey and the Iliad. There are things going on in this that tell me I need to keep experiencing this. So, I mean, I went in to watch a 70 millimeter film, and I came out and have not stopped thinking about, for the last 72 hours, 48 hours, regret. Not regret because I paid the money and drove an hour and a half to get there and all that. No. Regret, the character regret, the theme of regret in this movie. And to fully absorb it, I think I'm going to have to get back into the cinema and experience it again on the big screen. And so I'm talking to my older kids and seeing if one of them might want to come with me to see it. I'm probably going to get blacklisted for saying this. So settle down if you have a very strong opinion about this, but settle down. So the phrase, as Nolan intended, has been trending on social media, TikTok, things like this, because a lot of people are kind of humble bragging, even like I did last week, humble bragging. Yes, I've seen the movie in 70 millimeter format as Nolan intended, since he filmed this with 70 millimeter IMAX, cameras. But the phrase, as Nolan intended, as Nolan intended, as Nolan intended. And it's doing great business. They extended the run in the 70 millimeter IMAX screens around the world. It just opened up in China. It's doing great business, and it's going to be embraced and loved by cinephiles who are going to tell you that if you are seeing it in any other format, other than 70 millimeter IMAX, you are seeing or experiencing the film in an inferior format. This is where I court controversy. I don't think that matters. I really don't. I didn't have my hair blown back by the 70 millimeter experience. Like, I went in and I've never seen a film in 70 millimeter format. And I went into this screening expecting to just be blown away by the aesthetics and the technology. And the fact is that, maybe it's because I have poor eyesight, and that might be the case. I am legally blind in my right eye. Maybe that's why a second row helps. But honestly, if you didn't tell me or show me a comparative screenshots of, and this is trending as well, where they show, if you see it in 70 millimeter IMAX, you get more of the picture. And if you don't see it in 70 millimeter IMAX, then they cut off parts of the overall picture and you're missing out. Honestly, if I didn't see the comparative pictures, I wouldn't have been able to tell the difference between standard digital IMAX and 70 millimeter IMAX. And if that makes me a dilettante, if that makes me a fraud, if that makes me a joke, if you're laughing right now listening to that, so be it. Then I'm a joke. But we've got to stop trying to make people who cannot see it in 70 millimeter, because there are millions of Nolan fans that don't have access. It's not reasonable. I just listed half of the United States that doesn't have access, or, within hundreds and hundreds of miles, to a 70 millimeter IMAX screen. Do not feel bad. If you can see it in IMAX, that's exactly where you should see it. If it's not 70 millimeter, it's okay. It's okay. See it in IMAX anyway. You're going to get most of what Nolan was going for. And if you ask me, I can't tell a huge dramatic difference between the two screens. And maybe that's because my cinematic palate is impaired from watching too many Jackass episodes or movies. The same thing with somebody who pours me Coke Zero in regular Coke with full sugar. I sometimes struggle to tell the difference. And maybe it's because my palate is ruined by taco trucks and too much hot sauce. But needless to say, if you're listening to this and you're like, man, I'm sick and tired of feeling like I got less of an experience because I couldn't see it in 70 millimeter. The tickets were all sold out, or I'm 3 states away from the nearest 70 millimeter IMAX screen. Fret not. Fret not. You can still experience the grandeur, the wonder of this film, no matter how you want to see it. No matter how you want to see it. And so I just don't think it's that important. If you can see it in 70 millimeter, see it. If you can't, it's okay. See it anyway, no matter how you can experience it. Now, the obvious reading of this, and I didn't study this book in college. It's sad because I have. I'm literally looking off camera here to my bookshelf, and it sat there for most of my marriage. We bought it over 20 years ago, and it's this nice Barnes and Noble box set of the Odyssey and the Iliad, and it's nice translation. And I've never really cracked it and got into it. Epic poems are tough. Don't ask me to wax poetic about Milton's Paradise Lost or anything else. I mean, the only epic poem I think I can lay claim to having read and loved is arguably not an epic poem, and that's Song of Myself by Walt Whitman. So there are some examples that it might be, and there are some examples that it might not be. Anyway, doesn't matter. My point is that we know from an obvious reading of Homer's The Odyssey, even if you have just a tangential understanding of what the book is about, he just wants to return home to Ithaca. He's been to war with Agamemnon, securing the Mediterranean for the Greek Empire. And in this film, we know that, Odysseus and his men are desperate to get home. And I wrote down some notes for this podcast. So I'm going to be looking off screen. If you're watching this on YouTube, do not adjust your screen. I am looking slightly off. I'm perusing my notes. I care an awful lot about this podcast. I want to make sure I get through some of my main points here without riffing or just shooting from the hip and not staying on task or on subject, as it were. So I am going to look off camera slightly every now and then to reference some of the notes that I took. But I think the central question of the Odyssey is, can we ever return home after becoming someone else? Now you think about the character arc of Odysseus, the man he was 20 years previous versus the man he is, or rather that we encounter in the film. And they've done this. They've done a great job. Matt Damon ages in front of our eyes in very believable ways. And when you consider the 70 millimeter IMAX screen is going to capture, or the cameras are going to capture every detail, I mean, there's not a lot of unbelievable prosthetics in this. I mean, Matt Damon literally looks like an old man at the end of this. And so that the thing is that I don't believe that Odysseus is geographically lost. I think he's just psychologically displaced. I think he's spiritually displaced. I think he's lost himself. And that, I think, is the real fear here. He's lost who he is. And I think the fear of going home is at some point, and I'm skipping ahead here, so this is a spoiler. If you haven't read the book and you haven't seen the movie yet, this is a spoiler. You've been warned. But at one point, Matt Damon's character has to admit he doesn't really want to go home. And I think I know why. And I think it's because he doesn't know who he is anymore. He knows that the person he was when he left is no longer the person he now is. And I think he's afraid. He's afraid to bring home a version of himself that the people that love him most, his son Telemachus and his wife Penelope, that they love. They love this image of Odysseus that he knows no longer exists. And I want you to think about that in your life. I mean, let's liken that to ourselves. You know, has there ever been a reluctance to go back to a class reunion or a family reunion? Because the version of you that family or friends remember is no longer who you are. In this case, Odysseus carries an enormous amount of shame, of regret, of guilt. Now, some of us go to a class reunion because the person that we now am or now are that we no longer were has changed into something much better. A lot of us have an ugly duckling type experience, right? We blossom into a successful version of ourselves. You know, I have a six pack and I've got washboard abs and a chiseled chin. But in high school I was pudgy and the kids would pick on me. And now I'm this Adonis, and I can't wait to go back to my high school reunion and show people what they were really missing out on. And I make $1 million a year, and I drive a vet or whatever. I drive a Ferrari or whatever. I mean, there's that. Okay. But when we're talking about Odysseus, of course, we're talking about somebody who, through the campaign of following Agamemnon into war to secure the Greek, the Greek honor and respect throughout the Mediterranean, Odysseus has lost himself. And I think that's the real fear, is going home with this lost version of yourself and breaking the hearts of the people who have held on to this image of who you once were, not knowing that you've changed and you're a completely different person. And I think that's the real fear here. You know, I think a lot of us, when we look back at our past, and the older you are, I'm in my 50s now, I look back at this version of myself, naive, not as wise as I am now. If I, the old adage, if I knew then what I know now, think of the things that I would have done differently, right? And what a in retrospect, that can be a bitter thing to see. I mean, I always think about that whenever I watch Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, and I the ghost of Christmas past takes a bitter and crotchety old Ebenezer Scrooge into his past, and he gets to see this naive but rather happier version of himself. And the amount of regret that Ebenezer feels looking at these inferior, what he would say is, possibly inferior, naive versions of himself. But look what it ended up leading to. It led to somebody that isn't happy. And I think he wishes he could go back and change that. Well, I think about that. That's why the main theme of this film is regret. If we could just get back to the way things used to be, but life doesn't work that way. We can't unspool the thread of time and go back and redo things. As attractive as living in a multiverse with multiple versions of ourselves, each one representing a different choice, each strand or timeline representing a different choice that we may take to achieve a different outcome or a different destination. That's the stuff of science fiction. That's the stuff of it's fantasy, really. And the reality is that we can't do that. YOLO, man, you only live once. We get one opportunity to have experiences, to create relationships, to foster those relationships, to love the people we have relationships with, you know? And I think that's the real regret here. We only get one life, unless you believe in reincarnation. And even if you do believe in reincarnation, chances are, unless you're under some sort of hypnosis, you have no memory of your previous life. So if you believe all that stuff, you're welcome to believe it. I don't believe it, but that doesn't matter. The other thing I think that really struck me is that throughout the film, you hear this, and this is another spoiler, but you hear this ominous warning from the different people they meet, the Odysseus's men meet when they pull up on islands and stuff in the Mediterranean. They're asked if they are the men from the sea. Fear the great men from the sea, the men from the sea, the men from the sea. And then of course the horror. I think Odysseus is flushed with horror, and this is another big spoiler. He's flushed with horror towards the ending of this film when he realizes, oh my gosh, we're the men from the sea that everyone is terrified from. We're the nightmare. We're the horror. And I think when he realizes that, and I think he didn't want to face that. I think that's part of what the Sirens helped him realize, which horrifies him, terrifies him. I think that's the real anguish, is realizing and finally facing the fact that you're no longer the hero. It depends on who's telling the story. When we talk about storytellers, and whether it's the person who wrote Beowulf or the Odyssey or the Iliad, you know, sometimes the people that tell the stories get to decide who the heroes and villains are. But in Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey, Odysseus, I believe, realizes, I'm not a hero. And if at least I'm not anymore. I think I've become the very monster that I feared. I mean, we become a version of ourselves that we no longer recognize. And again, that goes back to why I think he's so terrified of going home. In the end, he's terrified because of the monster, and the person he's become is someone that the people who love him most would no longer recognize. And he's afraid, terribly afraid of that. But as we know, history entirely depends on who tells the story, whether it's for Troy, you know, and if you think about it, when we tell the story of Troy, the mythological, you know, fall of Troy, Odysseus is the hero. He's the savior. He crawls out of the Trojan horse and opens the gates and delivers salvation. But it's really destruction. And throughout this film, they refer to something called Zeus's Law. And this is another spoiler. It's the moment that Odysseus finally can face the fact that they violated Zeus's law, you know, when they overthrew the city of Troy through subterfuge, through deception, via the Trojan horse. And I think that is the real guilt that he carries, because I believe Odysseus understands, at least Damon's Odysseus understands, that dooms his crew. It dooms them. You know, I believe that, you know, for everyone else in this story that encounters Odysseus and his men, in most cases, they're the nightmare arriving over the horizon. They're the destructive force from the east or the west. And, you know, every empire, if you think about this throughout time, even the way we as Americans frame our own history, you know, we like to frame our history where the ends justify the means. The empire or the country itself, you know, sometimes we had to break some eggs, but that's what you have to do if you want to make an omelet. The ends justify the means. And I think every empire tries to frame their story as righteous. And the truth is as we delve into American history or the British Empire or whatever it is, we find out how much blood is shed so that we can create a society of haves and have-nots. And it's ugly. It's ugly. And that's really the problem with telling our own history, is having to acknowledge all the shortcomings, the moral failings, and some of the evil that gets done in the name of overall good. I mean, we're seeing that in the Middle East, right? We're seeing that in Gaza. It's horrible. It's horrible. But I don't want to get into a big political, socioeconomic, geopolitical discussion about world events framed against the backdrop of Homer's The Odyssey. I don't want to do that, because I want to try and again, that's why I'm referring off screen a little bit here to my notes so that I can stay on target. So we're going to continue doing this. Now, when I think about the guilt, I've hung in there with regret and guilt. And I'm borrowing this from somebody else. I can't remember who said this. I mean, millions of people are commenting on social media about the Odyssey, and they're giving their takes, and so many of them are fascinating. I haven't found too many I disagree with. But one person, and I can't remember who said this, they said that the way they approached the character of Zendaya's Athena in this, now this is another spoiler, they approached her like she was a ghost. And I took that one further. I go, the more I've thought about this, I'm like, that's right, because most of her appearances in the film, only Odysseus can see Athena. And when she comes as more of a haunting, not to scare Odysseus, but to prick his conscience. So to me, it felt like Athena may have been a character or represents some of the people that Odysseus and his men slaughtered for Agamemnon as they were conquering the Mediterranean. We know that one of Athena's priestesses, and it depicts it in the film, is subjugated, overtaken, and beheaded. And I thought that was tastefully done. So, and again, that's a bit of a spoiler, but I think Athena represents, she's a reminder. Much like Ariel is kind of a reminder to Prospero in The Tempest. Ariel shows up and castigates and pricks the conscience of Prospero, but the same function happens here. Athena shows up and is a reminder of Odysseus's very poor choices. She's not a comforting influence on his life, but she's a presence. And I really liked where they went with that. Now, I'm not sure if that's, supported by the text or if that's a Nolan fabrication, but it worked for me and I liked it. She really is his conscience. She is a reminder of his guilt. And she really does seem to remind Odysseus that the true journey that he must make is to confront himself and his decisions. And if you really think about it, the Odyssey, with all of its fantastical creatures and all of its fantastical images and cyclops and giants and hags and all these mythological things going on, and the trip to Hades, it's all, if you think about it this way, it's all one long conversation between one man and his guilty conscience. And I don't think he's going to want to go home until he can face that, fully face that, as an honest but flawed man can. The other thing, I talked a little bit about Zeus's Law. They repeatedly warn people that is kind of the moral code. Zeus's Law is a little bit similar to the Golden Rule. We have to be respectful. This isn't anarchy. We have morals. There is a code here. It's not the Code of Hammurabi, but it's a code, and we have to abide by it. Now, Zeus's Law is, I don't believe you really even find references to Zeus's Law quite like that in the text of the Odyssey by Homer, but, there is a purpose to respecting and honoring this law, regardless of which side of the conflict you are on. We a little bit like the Geneva Conventions. We expect in rules of engagement, in conflict, and this is just for war, there are things you can do and things you don't do. And so the Geneva Convention says that, war crimes are out of bounds and you're not supposed to do it. It doesn't mean people don't do it. It just means that there should be checks and balances and consequences for violating those laws. And in this case, it's Zeus's law. And throughout the film, we see that Odysseus and his men violate this law. And as a result of those violations, they suffer the misery of the damned. They really do. Odysseus and his crew are put through the ringer. They're miserable. They're desperate to get home. They can't get home. And it's because they're not learning. It's really strange. It's because, they violate this divine order. And in this case, you can say divine because Zeus, of course, this is within the universe where Zeus is the mythological Greek god of all, right? He is literally the biological father of Helen of Troy. We know that, right? But in Zeus's law, there's a divine order to things. And when you violate this divine order, you can literally turn the structure of the universe, of the world, it breaks. And then you can have all kinds of fantastical things happen. So I think that a lot of these fantastical encounters that Odysseus and his men end up having is a result of the first example of breaking Zeus's law, and that was the fall of Troy. I think after the fall of Troy, the war is over. They win. Troy falls to Agamemnon and his armies, and now the men can go home. But Odysseus can't go home. And by the way, all the men that were in that horse were Odysseus's men. And all the men that were in the Trojan horse are on Odysseus's ship. And it decides to take a different route home. And for the next 20 years, it can't get home. Agamemnon and his men got to go home, but not Odysseus and his men. I think that's an interesting detail you should remember. I also think that what's happening here is that Matt Damon, his performance, my goodness, was so good. Give the man an Oscar for Best Actor. At least nominate him. I mean, he's done a great job here. He's really, really internalized a lot of the guilt and the sorrow, and I mean, he really encapsulates this as an actor. He's done a phenomenal job. But he isn't returning home as a triumphant hero with laurel wreaths and people with ticker tape parade. That he's coming home to a country that has largely forgotten about him. He's coming home to a household where the only three people really, John Leguizamo, his son Telemachus, and Penelope. And the reason why I don't say John Leguizamo's character is because I don't think I can pronounce it correctly, but there's only a handful of people that remember Odysseus and would welcome him back the way they remember him. And Ithaca has moved on. The household has moved on. But Odysseus, he's coming back, and he's not really triumphant. Like I said, he's coming back as a broken man. He's coming back haunted. He's coming back like carrying the weight of his crew. And by the way, spoiler alert, his crew don't survive. He is the only survivor. So after 20 years, he's finally coming back. And he's a broken man in many ways, and he's not escaping the tortures of the damned for his mistakes. He's coming back as someone sorrowful, someone full of regret, who experienced the consequences of his actions. And it made him almost not want to come home at all, period. But he's coming back. And I think that's really, he's really a tragic figure. When I think about characters that go off to war and come back from war, and I think about it in literature and how it's been depicted, of course, I'm thinking about Macbeth. I'm thinking about the character of Macbeth. When the play begins with Macbeth, we've heard it's the ending of a major battle, right? It was a civil war in Scotland, and Macbeth and Banquo are, they're the heroes, especially Macbeth. He's leading armies, he's doing things, he's trying to quell this rebellion on behalf of King Duncan, and he does it. And then you hear from the bleeding captain at the very beginning, who meets King Duncan, of course, at the beginning of the play. He's talking about some of the heroic things that Macbeth did. And when you read that text, you read it sounds horrific, it sounds barbarian. And yet, Macbeth, when he comes back, I think Macbeth comes back a different person than when he left for war. I really do. And I'm wondering if Shakespeare, as he was writing this with Thomas Middleton, when Shakespeare was writing this with Thomas Middleton, yes, that's some trivia for you. Shakespeare did not author the entire text of Macbeth by himself. When he comes back, he's a different man. He's an absolutely different man. He's weary. He's tired. The text says he is, much like Odysseus is. But then he gets tempted in different ways. We won't get into that. But, Odysseus comes back a very broken man. And I think this is where the film becomes pretty extraordinary and pretty unique in this, is that there's a great quote in this film. I'm going to read it to you. I'm going to find it, and I'm going to read it to you really quick. Odysseus, of course, there's that great scene where he tells his men of his crew to put wax in their ears. They're going to go by these rocks where the Sirens, and no one has ever lived to recount the tale of the horrible Sirens song that lures or lulls men to their destruction. But after this horrifying experience where Matt Damon instructs his crew to tie him to the mast of the ship, and no matter how miserable, he cries out for help, to not release him, to leave him where he is, and to put wax in their ears to save themselves from what he's going to experience. He was asked, what was the siren song like? And he says, all the things you wanted to be, and then all the things you wished you never wished for. It was a delicious itch you wanted to scratch, but you find it under the skin and can't reach it. So the delicious itch becomes unbearable. It told you what you most want is what you most can't have, and that the most you can't have is what you already had and lost. It was a song of all the promises I failed to keep, and it told me, I don't really want to go home. That's the full quote. That's a standout speech in this film. Absolutely right. When I started thinking about that particular speech, it reminded me, when I heard about that, that delicious itch, you start thinking about what is a delicious itch, or what is an itch you can't scratch because it's underneath the skin, you can't reach it, right? And I started thinking about a particular line in Ridley Scott's 1982 Blade Runner. And it's a throwaway line. I mean, it wasn't like, this is a great speech, this is a great line of dialogue, shh, hush, get the camera centered. No, this was just kind of a line of dialogue, blink and miss it. But it's Brian James, the late Brian James, is playing Leon, the Nexus 6 replicant fugitive, and he accosts Harrison Ford's Deckard in the streets of LA, Los Angeles, and he says to him, nothing is worse than having an itch you can't scratch, right? That's it. That's the line. And when I think of that itch, I think that itch is like an existential itch, the fact that these replicants, these Nexus 6 replicants, knew that their lives were finite. There was an incept date. They weren't going to live forever. They were going to eventually, shut down as beings, as sentient beings, as it were. And it terrified him, and it made him unstable. But I start thinking about that existential itch, the thing that we most want that we can't have. When you think about what the Sirens are singing to Odysseus, and by the way, the scene with the Sirens is very cleverly done. Very cleverly done. It is largely left up to the imagination of the viewer what Odysseus actually hears. And I like that Nolan didn't spoon feed us a specific interpretation of what the Siren song is. It's left up to the imagination of the viewer, left up to the imagination of Damon's Odysseus in the moment. But the Sirens, they don't offer, they don't promise wealth or sex or immortality. They reveal desire itself. And as Odysseus says, the thing I most want, which I most can't have. They force you to confront every version of yourself, who you wanted to become, what you became instead, what you've lost, what you'll never recover. That's horrifying. I mean, imagine being shown, imagine you being tied to the mast, and for the Sirens to show up and to show you, much like Ebenezer Scrooge was shown by the ghost of Christmas past. Your goals and dreams, here they were, pure. You wanted to do this with your life. And here's what you ultimately became. And here are all the things you wanted to do with your life. And you didn't do them. You didn't fulfill a fraction of the things you wanted to in your life to become the person you wanted to be. In many cases, you took the easy way out. Faced with a choice of more hard work or an easier path, you took an easier path too often. And it led you here. Here's what you could have been. Here's what you ultimately became. That's horrifying. Can you imagine that? I think about that sometimes when I think about a buddy of mine in college. He never went out on the weekend. He never went anywhere. He was always studying. I thought he was a bit of a nerd. Yeah? Well, that nerd, he went to Harvard Law School. I sat next to him in biology in college. He went to Harvard Law, has his own law firm in Las Vegas. He has 3 Ferraris parked in his driveway. Now, I'm not saying Ferraris are the key to happiness. He lives in an enormous mansion, very famous to the Las Vegas people, runs ads on TV in Vegas during primetime hours for his law firm. Very successful guy. Deserves every bit of it because he did not take the easy path. He did the hard work. He did the dog work. He held off on certain appetites and focused on his studies, on training his mind so that he could, for the long-term success he envisioned himself to have. He deserves it. Absolutely deserves it. But if someone were to pull me aside and show me all the ways I blew it, all the ways I played it safe or took the path more traveled by and ended up becoming a lesser version of myself, less intelligent, less wise, less confident, less happy, I think that would be pretty horrifying to have to face that. And that appears to be what Odysseus had to face, tied to the mast, as those sirens revealed his guilt, revealed the versions of himself he could have been and wasn't. They even reveal versions of him, hey, you had happiness, you had everything, and you gave it up, and you'll never get it back. I think about that sometimes. I don't like having my picture taken. I'm very camera shy. I'm very insecure about my physical appearance. I wear this hat because the hair is thinning and graying. You know, I mean, I'm very insecure about that. When I get my picture taken, I remember how anxious and how much anxiety goes into getting that picture taken because I don't think I have a good side. I rarely have liked a photo of myself in my entire life. Rarely have I thought, that's a pretty good photo of me. I've almost never had that thought cross my mind. And yet, I remember that years later, after taking some of those photos that I thought I looked horrible in, years later, I'll go, I didn't look half bad back then. Why couldn't I be happy with my appearance back then? Because looking back on it now, I was a lot better looking back then than I am now. How come in the moment I couldn't appreciate what I had or how I looked, or I couldn't count my blessings or all the wonderful things I had around me back then? I was too stuck in my own head. I was thinking about the next thing and the next thing and the next thing that I didn't stop and realize what I had. And I think that is largely what Odysseus is feeling, is that happiness was always on the next horizon, the next battle, the next conquest, the next adventure. And he failed to recognize that he had adventure, he had happiness right then and there. I think that's one of the great laments that Odysseus is going to experience in this. So when I think about that line, the most you can't have is what you already had. And we can apply that to ourselves, Why wasn't I the happiest I ever could have been when I was 50 pounds lighter, younger, more virile? I had the whole world in front of me, Why did I assume that I would always be happier tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow? Creeps in this petty pace from day to day. Yeah, there's some more Macbeth for you. Why? Why can't we recognize how happy we can be right now? And it seems to be a decision, a choice to look around and just count the things that are a blessing to you right now. Not to be arrogant, not to be cocky, not to brag. You don't necessarily have to put that on social media and say, look at all my blessings, look at all my accoutrements, all my wealth. You don't have to do that in a public way, but in those quiet moments of introspection, why? And I'm guilty of this. Why can't we just say, my goodness, I am truly happy now. I'll look at pictures of my children when they were little, toddlers, and I'll almost cry. I'm almost crying right now. I get emotional because I wish I could go back. I wish I could go back and freeze my children in a suspended animation so they could stay toddlers for years with me because they were so wonderful. And I'm not saying I was a bad father. I'm just saying that the time went by too quickly, that I didn't stop to consider that I already had the most I would ever have. And now my kids are grown up. best chance I have to encounter little children like that again, or be with my kids, have their own kids, and I get to be a grandpa for a little while. I can't wait for that. And I'm not going to blow it. I'm not going to blow it. I'm going to savor it. I guess I'm going to spoil the grandkids. My wife and I have already discussed this. We're spoiling the grandkids. And maybe that's why if you have grandkids, you do the same, because you remember how quickly it went when you had kids. So when I think about Odysseus, that line, the most you can't have is what you already had and can't have again. I think about that. It's so true to each of us. You know, the Odyssey is not about Matt Damon's character. Yes, you can say that it is. That's the story. Those are the characters, yada, yada, yada. But I urge you to put yourself in this story. What does the character of Odysseus experience that you can relate to? Do you have regret? Did you not count your blessings when they were happening all around you in the past? When you had your health? And now you've got maybe high blood pressure and I don't have type 2 diabetes, but I'm pre-diabetic. You know, when you had a full head of hair and you were in what we call your salad days, you were at the pinnacle of your existence, and you know, you were full of hope, and now you're a little more cynical and jaded, maybe. You know, the people that can grasp happiness in the moment, I believe, are the most peaceful people on earth. And when I think about Odysseus's reluctance to go home, his admitting that he would finally get to go home, I don't think home is necessarily his physical home in Ithaca. I think he doesn't want to go home. We are never truly home if we remain restless, if we can't experience peace. That is how I define home. And maybe the creature comforts of your home give you peace. And that's true. That's true as well. But if we cannot find rest, if we cannot find peace when we are at home, I don't believe we are truly home. And I think that's why Odysseus didn't want to go home. In the end, he had to admit, I don't really want to go home, because I believe that his character, after going home without facing himself, without going through the trial of the Sirens and admitting his moral and ethical failings, that he would be a version of himself back home in Ithaca, and he would be a complete stranger to Penelope, a complete stranger. He was already a physically absent father to Telemachus, but he'd be a complete stranger to his son and friends and family, and he would never find peace, even being in his physical home. And so I think that's one of the main themes of this film. You know, we have to be, that delicious itch. It's not a physical itch. It's existential. Just like Leon's Replicant 6 character, his itch was entirely existential. It was to sustain his life, and he had no control over it. And in many ways, we are often ourselves at the mercy of events that happen around us, whether they're whirlpools or giants or who knows, or sirens on the cliffs. You know, we sometimes don't have the opportunity to shape events as they happen to us. We're at the mercy of those events, but we must not lose ourselves. We must remember who we are. We must stand firm. And if we have to, we must face difficult truths. We must face the facts. And if that means we metaphorically lash ourselves to the mast of our own ships in the open sea, then that's what we need to do. I liked this film on so many different levels. I have said off the cuff, I don't think it's Christopher Nolan's best film. I'm sorry, but The Prestige is always going to be number one for me, I think. But I have not stopped thinking about the Odyssey. I have to see it again. This is an evolving opinion I have about the film. And I don't know. If you ask me a year from now if I think the Odyssey is the best Nolan film, I might say, you know what? Upon reflection, I think it is. I think it's the best film he's ever made. But it's really hard to call it now. I'm still evolving. My opinion on this film is still in development. So whatever your experience is for the Odyssey, I hope that you can do something that I didn't do. When you go to finally see it, if you're only planning on seeing it once, I hope that you were able to take in the larger meaning of the film. I mean, I get it. Nolan's got an allergy to CGI. He loves to use practical effects. That's fine. That's fine. The soundtrack is authentic. The practical effects help the film feel authentic. I know he's going for verisimilitude, but it's just weird that he's got practical instruments used from the period and he's going for realism and stuff. And yet, some of the other decisions he makes, like modern language, none of the characters have Mediterranean accents. It's written in kind of a modern American vernacular. I mean, there's no antiquated use of words. There's no antiquated words in it. This is kind of an anachronistic, and I'm not just talking about the the casting of certain characters and their cultural backgrounds, which I think is just noise. That has been just noise that all the MAGA chuds have complained about it. It's just that sometimes Nolan is slavishly attached to, I want it to be as authentic as possible. And other times it's like, I don't really care. I don't really care about the dialogue. But if there's one thing I will say, the dialogue makes it a lot more accessible to wider audiences' understanding. Because let the record show, I mean, Homer's writings are very dense. They're very dense. His epic poems are incredibly dense. You can lose a lot of people. A lot of people feel that way about Shakespeare too. His language is really archaic and very dense and hard to get into. And we want something a little bit more modernized or standardized, for us. And the same thing goes for people in religion too. They'll come out with a Bible translation or a Bible version that's been, updated with language. I mean, I don't know. I mean, at some point, someone's going to end up referring to Jesus as bro. So maybe, and if that's what helps, that's what helps. I just think of the idea of longing. I think the idea of aging, the itch to the delicious itch. I mean, we could go back to that a little bit, and that itch can represent, Odysseus's innocence, which is no longer there. It's a delicious itch because it's a version of himself that he admired, that no longer exists, and he can't get back again. And I think about that in Citizen Kane. Rosebud represents a lost innocence that Charles Foster Kane, played by Orson Welles, he can't get back again. Or The Green Knight, the quest is, about reaching a destination rather than confronting his own character. Or, Blade Runner, like I said earlier, that the replicants, they're not longing merely for more time, but the fullness of a human life that they can never possess or experience. So, like a lot of things, like tears and rain, we're going to disappear. It'll all be gone. I'm not trying to get poetic here. I just want to say that if you haven't had an opportunity to see the Odyssey, I hope that you have wrenched out of it some of the meanings and themes that I have touched upon here. There's obviously a wider discussion to be had on it. I'm certainly no academic when it comes to this type of stuff, but I hope that you've at least been able to appreciate what Nolan is trying to say and what he's trying to help audiences understand. And I can't say much more than that. This was an interesting experience at the cinema for me, and I need to go back so I can breathe in, ingest, take in, as it were, more of its meaning. Anyway, my throat is nearly dry from talking too much. I'm going to have to go. I'll see you guys next week. I have some exciting guests coming on. We're going to discuss some very exciting things happening in cinema and independent film and feature films. Anyway, you guys have a great one. I'm glad you were here. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.